If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
The Kristin Smart murder trial resumed in Salinas this morning.
Welcome back to my coverage of the Kristin Smart trial. Coincidentally, I am on call for jury duty this week in SLO County. So anywho, Monday morning is day 1 of week 3. And lo and behold, one of Ruben's jurors did not show up. So an alternate was selected at random and sworn in prior to proceedings. I wonder if it was the same juror that caused last week's postponement. It's really early on to be losing a juror, especially in light of the insight provided by the attorney in my last episode. Never a dull moment in this trial, which is what I expected. There's been so many delays, it really makes me wonder how far past October of 2022 the trial will end up lasting. It was just a mere few weeks ago, once jury selection was finalized. At the start of the trial, we had 12 jurors with 8 alternates. And so far, each defendant has used an alternate. And I didn't even hear about Paul's alternate being used. I wonder if that was related to the other delay earlier in the proceedings. At this rate, I hope they have enough to go through the trial, and this might be a challenge.
This is not the first odd circumstance to happen in the case. Both men are being tried at the same time, but with different juries. And the trial was moved after a judge had ruled that Paul and Ruben would not likely receive a fair trial in San Luis Obispo. Both of those really interesting moves, I think, by the judge and by the prosecution.
Let's listen to more from the experts regarding concerns over this jury so far.
I think that it could affect the rhythm of the case. I think that it can be very important when you, and we've seen it in other trials, where they're presenting evidence, and then there's a stopping point, there's a delay for whatever reason, either planned or unplanned, and it gives the jurors time to ruminate about what they've heard, and either in a good way or a bad way, depending on where the stopping point is.
Here's some more good insight from the professionals regarding the demographics and effects on a trial in the state of California.
California, as you know, is a interesting place when it comes to demographics and locales. And so, I'm in Los Angeles, massive place, right? Like almost 10 million people are in Los Angeles County. Not hard to pick a jury, really. San Luis Obispo County, it's about 283,000 people live in that county. And so it's very, very small by comparison. And it would be very difficult to pick a jury in that town. So they moved to Salinas, which is only 437,000 or so people. And so you've got 2 juries, and you don't want to have to redo this because it's just so small. And it was these are really small, tight-knit communities. And so you don't want to have to try to do this again without, given all the publicity around it.
I agree with you. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why the judge is taking a delay rather than seating another juror, because he knows this is going to be a very long trial, and he doesn't want to lose any jurors. And I know that they've got several alternates. I can't remember right now how many, but you can run through alternates too, especially living in the time of COVID. You can lose alternates, and I'm not talking about people passing away. I'm talking about people just getting sick and they can't delay the trial that long. But the last thing you want as a judge, I know one of the things they fear is somehow getting it to a point in the trial where they run out of jurors and have to declare a mistrial and do this thing all over again. So I wonder if that's why the judge is kind of willing to take these little pauses here and there, because he wants to make sure he saves all of his jurors.
By the way, here's Judge Jennifer O'Keefe, who's definitely a female, presiding over this trial. I'm surprised that he didn't know that. So no one wants a retrial, not after already waiting 26 years. My goodness sakes. As you know, I've already expressed my concerns regarding the jury and a possible mistrial. Let's expect the best, everybody.
And I think that because of these counties being so small, can you imagine trying to do that in Los Angeles County? Judges got to move. Yeah. The things are backing up. So they can take that time and do that there. Whereas here, here, that's not possible.
The first witness on the stand Monday was James Camp, an investigator with the DA's office. He spoke extensively with both attorneys about the layout of the Cal Poly campus, focusing on the location of the red brick dorms where both Smart and defendant Paul Flores lived.
As stated, first to testify in the morning was the DA's investigator, James Camp. He began working the Kristin Smart case in 2021. He focused on the Crandall Way house, the location itself, and the layout. The defense asked him about pictures of Crandall Way and wondered if there was any from 26 years ago. He asked about if there was construction done, and Camp admitted he had no pictures prior to 2021. He knows about a different floor plan, according to witnesses that were there at the party that night, where there was a bar and a pool table back in May of 1996. Camp admitted that Paul was the only suspect he interviewed and agreed that it is his job to exonerate potential suspects when appropriate, as Singer was asking for him to comment on that. Besides the Crandall Way party home being reviewed, he also covered the layout of the red brick dorms. He also went over Kristin's route that night. You can actually review the route on my playlist as Kristin's Last Walk, and we were quite surprised actually when we took the route ourselves. And even people we knew that had attended Cal Poly didn't realize that was the exact route that she walked that night. The prosecution ended by saying he will recall Camp later in the trial. The defense cross-examination with Robert Singer consisted of discussions of the various travel path options from the party back to the dorms. And at one point, Camp said, quote, "There's a million options," end quote. You can see here by the maps we used on our route that there are many ways, but there was witnesses that walked with her.
After being off since last Monday, this high-profile trial has picked up once again. Among the witnesses on the stand Monday, Smart's dormitory roommates. Jurors heard from Crystal Tischendorf, who lived with Smart in Muir Hall on the Cal Poly campus. Answering questions from prosecutor Chris Prevel, she explained she didn't know Smart very well since they lived together for only 3 months.
Next to testify Monday morning was Kristin's roommate in the dorm, Crystal Calvin. It's been said that Kristin did not get along with her roommate, according to other people that have testified. But according to Crystal, they were friends, but not close. Sorry, that just made me chuckle. Crystal continued and explained that she moved in with Kristin in February of 1996 after her previous roommate had moved out, and they were both freshmen at Cal Poly at the time. She and her friends were going to a different party that night, and that's part of why they didn't hang out a lot, because they already had their own friends before they became roommates. She spoke on her concern after not hearing from Kristin and realizing she left all her personal belongings behind in the dorm room. Crystal started asking around about Kristin and discussed possible scenarios of where she might be and why she hadn't told anybody that she wasn't coming back. Crystal testified that she and other dorm mates contacted law enforcement on Sunday, which was 2 days after they last saw Kristin, and again on Tuesday when she was a no-show for classes at Cal Poly. Crystal claimed that law enforcement did not take her seriously, even though she was very, very concerned about Kristin, and this was out of character for her. The defense briefly started their cross-examination of Crystal before the lunch recess. He asked her about her boyfriend, his roommates, and whether they went to the same party that Kristin was at on Crandall Way the evening she was last seen back in May of 1996.
Tischendorf adding she spent the night with her boyfriend in a different dorm hall, but when she returned the next morning, Smart was nowhere to be seen, and her belongings, most notably her backpack and keys, had not moved from the night before. Tischendorf said it was, quote, unusual and out of character for Smart to stay overnight and not tell her. Tischendorf admitted Smart had stayed out on previous occasions, but reiterated Smart would always tell her. Under cross-examination from defense attorney Robert Sanger, he asked about Ted Munley, the roommate of Tischendorf's boyfriend, wanting to know how much she knew of his whereabouts during the night. He also asked if Smart had difficulty with other women in the dorm, which Tischendorf said she couldn't remember. Another witness was Steve Fleming, a Cal Poly basketball player at the time who lived in the same dormitory as Smart. He spoke about the friendship they developed during their freshman year.
I understand that Steve Fleming is a witness who took the stand today. What did we hear from him?
He was on the stand yesterday, and he is back on the stand today under cross-examination.
Okay, day 6, August 2nd, 2022 of the Kristin Smart murder trial was held in Department 4 in the Monterey County Courthouse in Salinas, California. The court resumed at 10:30 a.m., and it continued with the testimony of Steve Fleming, who lived on the 3rd floor of Muir Hall in the same wing as Kristin. He spoke of bonding with Kristin over both of them being tall. He described Kristin as having an open personality. They spoke approximately 5 times each week. She attended his basketball games on occasion, and he was a mama's boy, and Kristin helped him overcome that when he was missing his mom so much at college. I am touched whenever I hear the little things about Kristin. These memories humanize her and gets me emotional. And to think of all these young Cal Poly students 26 years ago who were forever changed by this night. When the prosecution showed Steve a picture of Kristin to confirm her identity, he grabbed a tissue to wipe away tears. He spoke on noticing Paul in Muir Hall, even though he did not live there, even at 1 a.m. when Steve spotted Paul in a study area without any books. None of Paul's friends lived in Muir Hall either. Steve said, in his opinion, Paul was, quote, kind of like following Kristin, end quote. Steve spotted Paul a few feet in Kristin's dorm doorway, and she was in the room further in by the desks. Steve said he could tell by her body language she was not okay with it. That was a quote from Steve, actually. I recall Steve's preliminary testimony where he described Paul as, quote, a lurker, quote, creepy, quote, he was like a puppy dog, kind of just there. He felt like he had failed Kristin, quote, what I know as a man today, she was nervous, end quote. I felt chills run up my spine when Steve testified that he never saw Paul in Muir Hall again once Kristin disappeared. It truly seems Paul was actually stalking Kristin prior to her disappearance. This did surprise me, as I always thought Paul, the predator, had just committed a crime of opportunity when he saw Kristin so intoxicated she could barely walk. Looks like he had been waiting for this exact scenario with Kristin for quite some time. Steve described Paul's behavior as hunting-type behavior. He also said she was not interested, and as I've heard multiple times from many other dorm mates, Steve also said Kristin was just too nice. When Steve was asked if he asked Paul to leave Kristin's dorm room when he saw her there, he said he didn't stop, he just walked by, and then said, quote, at times, I think she was a better friend to me, but like I said, my ego at that time was huge, end quote. Today, Steve's testimony went to the lunch break.
And what he's been talking about is his interactions with both the suspect, now defendant, Paul Flores, and his interactions with his neighbor at the dorms. They lived in the same dorm, victim Kristin Smart. So the key takeaways from this testimony is he is being asked over and over again his interactions with Kristin.
How many times have we heard similar things to this so far in the proceedings?
He was talking about how others in the dorm system, especially women, would come up to him and mention that Paul kind of creeped them out. The defendant kind of creeped them out. And that was under direct examination. He made those comments, and also, again, under cross-examination. So basically reiterating over and over again on the stand that he felt that Kristin was uncomfortable with now the defendant, Paul Flores, when they were in school before her disappearance in 1996.
That's really chilling to hear, Matt.
It's being reported that Steve did get frustrated while he was testifying on the stand today during cross-examination.
In court Tuesday, cross-examinations continued for former Cal Poly classmate of Kristin Smart, Stephen Fleming, where the witness appeared to become frustrated from the questioning of defense attorney Robert Sanger. As the trial for Paul and Ruben Flores began Tuesday, Paul's attorney Robert Sanger asked Steve Fleming about his friendship with Kristin, as well as his attraction to Kristin's former roommate. Sanger pressed Fleming about his knowledge of Paul leading up to Kristin's 1996 disappearance. Sanger also asked Fleming if he remembered telling the FBI last year that he was not 100% sure that Paul Flores was guilty after saying the opposite during his testimony on Monday. Fleming said he did not recall.
All right. Here's where I insert my opinion. I know, everybody has one. Please share yours in the comments below as well. First of all, when the witnesses say they don't recall in this particular case, if there ever was a case to have a tough time remembering, especially every little detail, I think this would be the case. This happened over 26 years ago, and these were all young, impressionable college students who were more interested in having a good time that night than worrying about the possibility that someone they were partying with was going to be raped and murdered. Second of all, am I missing something here? Sometimes I feel like I'm in the twilight zone with this case of just how strange some of the things that go on or don't go on compared to other cases. So what I want to know is, what's the big deal about Steve saying that he didn't think Paul was guilty before, but he thinks he's guilty now? I mean, can a person change their darn mind? Jeez. Usually the more evidence you see, hear, and know, the more educated decision you're able to make. So I would assume the information that Steve's collected over the years, he'd actually be foolish not to think that Paul's guilty. And to me, it seems like he didn't prejudge, so that would actually be a positive? I don't know, I'm confused.
Referencing another interview Fleming had with the FBI in 1999, Sanger questioned Fleming on whether he recalled telling agents he had seen Paul in Kristin's dorm room up to 6 times during the winter quarter of 1996. Sanger asked Fleming how he knew about this information, since Fleming may not have been living in Muir Hall at the time, and since none of Kristin's other friends from college told investigators they had seen Paul in her room. Again, Fleming responded that he did not recall.
I'm definitely biased, and I'm Team Kristin all the way, but we can't wear rose-colored glasses here. Remember in my other episode when the attorney explained all the facets of credibility? In this tactic, is the defense using a tactic like splitting hairs as far as the number of times he saw Paul in the dorm room? How material is it in the bigger picture? Well, we know the jurors get to decide that. The defense would rather the jury throw the baby out with the bathwater and not believe anything that Steve has said. Sorry, I used 2 sayings in the same clip. Why would Sanger say Steve may not have been living in Muir Hall? If he had proof, he'd show it, and he'd shove it in his face. No one must have the receipts, as they say either way. I find that interesting, but all he's trying to do is raise some kind of doubt so that the jurors will not believe Steve's testimony. Speaking of what appears to be desperation practically as far as raising reasonable doubt, Ruben's attorney, Messick, hopefully that's pronounced correctly, had a heated exchange with Steve about whether or not he really lived in Oakland or Pleasanton. It reminds me of the band Green Day. My friends went to high school with them, and they always claim they're from Berkeley, but they actually went to high school in Martinez. I mean, really, what's the relevance to the Kristin Smart case? Is that really the best you got, guys? Even when we're on vacation and we're asked where we live, we just say Pismo Beach because it's easier, even though we live in a small town that's part of the 5 cities. Another interesting tidbit, during Steve's testimony, the jurors had a note sent asking him a question. The way that works is the attorneys and the judge and everybody reviews the question. They decide what's reasonable to ask, and what they wanted to know is if when Steve left that night and saw Paul in Kristin's dorm room, if Kristin looked at him or acknowledged him or noticed him. And Steve said he couldn't say either way. So that was a little bit interesting.
Ruben Flores attorney Harold Messick asked Fleming why he hadn't come forward to authorities immediately following Kristin's disappearance. Fleming responded that he was young and at the time had a mistrust and fear of police.
Is it really so hard to believe that a young black man would be nervous to come forward and get involved? Not to make it about race, but let's be real here. A missing white girl at a very white college in a white city in a white county, even to this day, you can look into it, the headlines if you want, on your own. It was even a national level at one point in 2021. Steve was probably just grateful and happy to be at Cal Poly, as most young men would be. I'm not saying our whole county is racist. I don't want to open that can of worms. My focus here is Kristin. I just wanted to point that out. Come to think of it, it reminds me that I have no idea of the jury demographics as far as age, race, male, female, or any of those type of things. Maybe after a successful hearing with the Media Coalition on Thursday, that'll be some of the stuff that can be released. Usually this stuff's being televised, and we can't even see some of these things on paper, which is another reason a lot of these bigger court shows aren't following the case, is because they know people want to see the coverage, and they can't get it other than still photography. So I'm going to do my best for you guys. As the trial continues, Matt Toomey, who is a Cal Poly freshman and attended the Crowned Away party on May 24th, 1996, with his roommate at the time, Ross. He said it was approximately 10 p.m., and Kristin introduced herself as Roxy to his roommate, Ross, and it's Ross Ketchum, actually, who's already testified. She also asked Matt if Ross had a girlfriend and told Matt that she thought Ross was attractive. Paul approached right after that, asking Ross how he knew Kristin, and said she was good looking or hot or something like that, Matt said. Paul was definitely interested in Kristin, according to what Matt said. When Matt left the party at midnight, Kristin was laying on her side with her arms above her head on the side lawn. Her eyes were closed. Matt and Ross offered to help her, but she refused in a slurred speech. They weren't too worried, knowing that there was plenty of other people still at the party, so he left and walked to his girlfriend's house. Next, Matt was under cross-examination with Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger. After Matt admitted to talking to a private investigator in 1998, Sanger wanted to know why he refused to speak with the defense private investigator, and Matt said he just didn't want to. I don't know why that kind of made me chuckle. So continue on with Matt's cross-examination. There were a lot of questions about Kristin, how much attention she was getting at the party and what they saw her doing at the party and how she was behaving with the other men at the party. He also confirmed that she was a tall, good-looking girl, and Matt basically said he didn't really pay much attention to her once they were at the party, other than at the beginning what they already talked about when they first got there, and of course at the end, which I've already mentioned. Matt was finally excused towards the very end of the day at 4:22 p.m. Next to testify was Trevor Bolton, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any names, I'm sorry. So Trevor was a sophomore at Cal Poly in 1996, and he talked about the party and how there was about 20 people when he first got there. Trevor went on to describe Kristin at the party and how she said, "Hi, I'm Roxy," and kissed him. This is that story we've all heard about over the years where Kristin took someone into the bathroom. It was this Trevor guy. Since it was so late in the day, Trevor was only on the stand briefly, and his testimony will resume on Wednesday morning, August 3rd, 2022. Here's a little insight as far as what's going on outside the courtroom during the trial.
A lot of the people that have already testified, including Kristin Smart's mother and father and, fellow siblings. We see them arriving in the courthouse very early. We see Denise Smart. She also sits in the overflow room from time to time. That's where a lot of the media gathers, because you can use electronics in that particular room. In the main courtroom, no electronics whatsoever. You can only use a notepad and pencil there, or pen. And so she is taking notes and really listening in on key testimony. She's waited 26 years for this. We also see Stan Smart, Kristin Smart's father, entering and leaving the courtroom.
Is it just me, or does anyone else find Ruben Flores' behavior odd as being reported during the proceedings, especially his behavior outside of court? Here's another example.
And Ruben Flores, one of the defendants in this case, the father who is facing charges. He's out on bond, 81 years old. He typically waves at the court TV cameras as he comes and goes. Yesterday, I asked him in the courtyard here if he plans on testifying. He just continued to wave. His defense attorney, Harold Messick, jumped in front of him and said, you're going to have to wait until the end of this case, the end of the trial, to get the answer to that. But I can't even tell you, even if I wanted to, we're under gag order.
I think the case is going well and honestly looking pretty good. It always makes me feel better when the pros/experts see it this way. Check out what they're thinking at this point in the trial with their expert opinions and expert eyes.
Here, it's looking, honestly, I look at it and I think it looks pretty good, but for the prosecution, I mean, you've got a person who puts Ms. Smart with Paul Flores, one of the last persons to see her alive, it appears, her friend Cheryl Anderson. They're leaving a party. Ms. Smart goes off with Paul Flores. She is seen as intoxicated that evening, passed out, and can't stand on her own accord. You have a different kind of evidence. So you have forensic evidence where you've got 4 cadaver dogs who have all alerted to the smell of death in Paul Flores's Cal Poly dorm room, and specifically to his mattress. You have folks who have made allegations against this man in the past with respect to him drugging and allegedly sexually assaulting them. So that information apparently is going to come in. And then you have some additional forensics. You have an anthropologist who saw a disturbance in the soil underneath Ruben Flores, Paul Flores' father's home, underneath a deck. You have fibers that would not normally be seen in nature, certain colors like blue and red and white, which are all consistent with what Ms. Smart was wearing at the time. The depth of this disturbance is about the size of what a casket would be. There's a tenant who says that the plumber was deprived access to this locked area where this disturbance was underneath this deck. And there had been a flood there, and that Mr. Ruben Flores had said, no, I'll fix it myself, thanks. But there was a neighbor who observed a trailer being backed up to this deck area late at night one night, and that people who normally wouldn't be spending the night, his ex-wife and her new boyfriend, had spent the night that evening. You have additional information from law enforcement where the behavior of the defendant. So Paul Flores he gives some story about why he has a black eye, that he was playing basketball, and they go interview the friends, and the friends are like, that didn't happen. And so now he changes his story, so we have an inconsistent statement, to he bumped his head while he was working on his car. And then he abruptly leaves the interrogation room. And so that gets to guilty mind evidence. No person who is innocent would do that sort of behavior. Right. So I think it looks pretty good.
If that was the prosecution's closing argument, you would have convinced me. I thought that was pretty good the way you laid that all out.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I have to admit, every time I hear about Susan and her involvement, my blood boils. I just feel like she should have some accountability in this. I know that it wouldn't be a very long sentence, but it's also just the point of it.
My other thought is this. 25 years is a long time to keep your mouth shut. And I think that the Floreses probably talked to someone in that 25-year period. And I think that someone finally got a conscience and came forward. And my prediction, we'll see if I'm right or wrong here, is that someone is going to testify that somebody said something about knowing where that girl ended up or how she died or where that body not ultimately is, because I think they would have found it, but where it had been at one point. So we'll see.
I have come across this assumed bombshell testimonies several times now in my research, and I'm wondering where they're getting the information, if there was a confidential leak or what, if somehow they're just assuming, but I feel like they wouldn't do that. It reminds me of one of the things I thought about. We all know that Paul has a drinking problem with all his DUIs and all his shenanigans at the bars and taking advantage of inebriated women, so on and so forth. And I was thinking if there was some kind of plant who was willing to sacrifice herself for a little while to hang out with Paul. We all know drunk lips sink ships. And he did have one girlfriend for a while. I'm just wondering if something like that possibly happened. That would be so amazing if the people counting on this bombshell testimony are correct. I cannot wait. Here's more of what we can expect as the trial continues.
And now let's put it on your screen from some of the other coeds that we're expecting to testify soon. And that could be as early as this afternoon with all of this. It's a lot more witnesses, people that attended college, including Tim Davis, who walked with Kristin Smart towards Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, the red brick dorms that we hear about time and time again, the night that she disappeared. Jeremy Moon, he's another college co-ed who observed Paul had a black eye. That's going to be very significant because the prosecutors are trying to bring in a picture of the defendant with a black eye from a mugshot when he was arrested around that time after Memorial Day weekend in 1996. So this is going to lay the groundwork for that. And then Rick Newfield, the sheriff who processed Paul's dorm room. And we know what is also going to be brought in evidence is the fact that there were cadaver dogs that were sniffing around in the dorm after Kristin had gone missing in 1996. And they one of them sat in front of Paul Flores' dorm room, and one of them were sniffing around his mattress. So we are going to be hearing from the detective that processed that whole scene.
As always, justice for Kristin.
If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for watching.
Bring my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.